The middle-class lifestyle was a trademark of the American dream beginning in the 1950s. America had just come out of World War II, and it was a great time of affluence as well as unity. There was a rapid growth of the number of people that were able to afford a middle-class standard of living. For the 15-year period after the war, home ownership increased from 40 to 60%, 75% of families owned cars and washing machines, and 87% owned a TV, which was a new technology at the time. By 1960, the middle class made up 61% of all Americans, and life was pretty good. The average US worker made about $5,600 US per year, and the median house cost $11,900, which meant that the price to income ratio was 2.1. In other words, if you took 100% of your income and put it towards a house, it would take you roughly 2.1 years of wages in order to afford that house. Now, in present day, housing looks a lot different for the middle class. In addition to other items such as transportation, food, tuition, as well as wages, they're painting a whole new picture of what the middle class looks like today. Many people today are feeling squeezed. This is the term that refers to rising costs of products as well as services, coupled with the fact that stagnant and declining wages are present. The Cleveland Federal Reserve published a report back in 2020 saying that the middle class today was actually way better off than they were 50 years ago, but we're going to address that a little bit later in this video. Now, for this video, I interviewed Alyssa Quart. She's a journalist and also the author of the book called Squeezed: Why Our Families Can't Afford America, and here's how she defines the middle class.
Well, one of the ways to define the middle class is how much money they earn. Sometimes it's $65,000. Like that was how it's defined in 2020. But in places like San Francisco or New York, to be living a quote unquote middle class lifestyle, you would in effect have to be earning something closer to six figures.
Now, the Pew Research Center defines the middle class as having an income between 2/3 and double what the median household income is in the United States. That means as of 2023 to 2024, based on the median household income data of $75,000 per year, someone in the middle class would be making between $50,000 and $150,000 per year. Of course, income is not only the defining characteristic of the middle class. I'm sure there are a lot of intangibles as well, but for the sake of today's video, we're going to stick with the income range because we just want to compare actual numbers to actual other numbers. First, let's take a deep dive into how housing has changed for the middle class in the most recent of years. Back in 1974, the home to price income ratio was 3.6 and hovered between 3.5 and 5 for 3 decades until the mid-2000s. The ratio peaked in 2006 right before the housing bubble crash at 6.81 and actually leveled off for most of the 2010s in the range between 5 and 6. But as you can see, since the pandemic ended, we're seeing the ratio hit all-time highs, especially in the last 2 years, with 2023 having a home price to income ratio of 7.51. That means it would take roughly 7.5 years of equivalent wages to buy the median house in the US in 2023. This is very different to the golden era where paying off a house could be done in a relatively short amount of time. Now, if you thought that was bad, let's look at the average house price to average income ratio in the UK. Our English friends have been seeing ratios consistently over 7 for the past 10 years, and lately it's been consistently over 8. Here's another graph of inflation versus home prices from 1970 to 2023. You can see that the change in consumer price index has been steadily going up linearly over time in the darker blue line, and while home prices have been outpacing inflation since 1970, in the past decade it has really quite ballooned. In fact, home prices have increased 1,608% since early 1970, while inflation has just increased 644% in the same time frame. So a $20,000 basket of assorted goods in 1970 would cost you $148,000 today, versus a $20,000 house in 1970 would cost you over $340,000 today. So while inflation is definitely present, home prices have outpaced even inflation by a good margin. Now, there is an argument that I hear over and over again, which is that our homes these days are way larger than those back in the 1970s. So let's look at the data here. You can see that the median area in square feet for a home 50 some years ago was around 1,550 square feet, but these days it's closer to 2,300 square feet. This is definitely a very good counterpoint. I mean, if homes are larger, they should cost more, am I right? But let's actually control for the square footage and let's take a look at the data. The median home price in 1975 was $39,300, so the price per square foot in 1975 was $25.35 a foot, or $144.68 adjusted for inflation. In 2022, the median home price in Q1 was $449,300, and the median square footage was 2,300. That means the price per square foot was, adjusted for inflation, $204.96 today. That means homes in terms of square footage are 41.66% more expensive today compared to its predecessors.
So that's one thing that's squeezing people who are middle class, because one of the ways that people define themselves as making it in America is through home ownership and car ownership and other kinds of markers like that.
Now let's talk about tuition costs, but before we talk about that, I wanted to tell you about my free newsletter called Hump Days. That's where we come out with free finance and business news twice per week, and I personally oversee it. So if you like what we put out here, make sure to check that out down below. The link will be in the description. It's free to sign up, and there's no payment whatsoever, and we have over 40,000 happy readers. Now in terms of school tuition, that's another category where it's just gotten disproportionately so expensive compared to the wages that we have today. In 1971, the average tuition was $1,250 per year. That's $10,000 per year adjusted for inflation. But the average cost of tuition in 2023 as well as 2024 for the same public four-year institution is 2.5 times higher at $25,000 per year. So this graph tells it all. You can see that if public school tuition kept steady with inflation, that a single year of tuition today would be less than $10,000 per year. However, we just aren't really seeing that. Quote, outstanding education debt in the US exceeds $1.7 trillion, burdening Americans more than credit card debt or auto debt. The average loan balance at graduation has tripled since the 90s to $30,000 from $10,000. Around 7% of student loan borrowers actually still owe over $100,000 or more on their student loans. And that's even if you get in, because getting in might have some unexpected costs.
And we're told in this country that part of the way that we make it is by getting well educated and getting certified. Across the board, there's an arms race to get kids into college. And so this is a kind of hidden cost where you have tutors and programs for SATs that are immensely expensive, right? And if you're middle class, you're not able to participate in that.
So the middle class not only has to deal with higher home prices, higher tuition costs, but also food has been increasing a ton in cost as well. According to a Harvard publication, quote, for decades, food prices climbed on average by 2% annually. Now in 2020, food went up 3.9%, 6.3% in 2021, and 10.4% in 2022. Other sectors that had big price increases because of the pandemic have since seen them start to decline, but food has not. In fact, in the most recent inflation report, we actually see that food and food away from home are contributing to a lot of the inflation that we're seeing today. And these food prices disproportionately affect the middle class as well as the lower class because they just don't have that much budget to work with. Food costs make up a larger percentage of that. It's also worth noting that food as well as gas prices are similar in that they have salience. That's a term that I read about in the Harvard publication that I'll link down below, but it basically just means how often you notice something. Since gas prices and food prices are always in your face, if their prices change drastically or really quickly, you're gonna probably notice that. This is part of the reason why the middle class are feeling squeezed, the fact that they're noticing all these prices going up right before their eyes. Another factor to this feeling of being squeezed is the high cost of transportation. The cost of a new car adjusted for inflation today is higher than it's ever been, so the cost of the average new car these days is $48,000 at the end of 2023, and back in 1960, the median car price back then was $2,600, which basically accounted for 46% of someone's annual salary back then. These days, a car will go for about 64% of someone's median salary. There have been a lot of advancements in cars that you could argue is justifying the higher price. However, the cost of living for all the other types of factors in our lives is making it so that people are signing on for longer loan terms than they can actually afford. In fact, I think cars are a huge reason why people are behind the eight ball these days, and a lot of people are opting for new cars when they just never should. With the average car payment being $729 in America for a brand new car, and the average loan term getting even longer at 68 months, we're seeing a huge amount of consumer debt being accumulated across all Americans, not just the middle class. Medical expenses in 2023 and 2024 are a lot higher as well.
Medical bills, which have become astronomical and hard to find doctors on your insurance and et cetera, long waiting time. So then people may even, rack up bills seeing people privately. 30 million Americans have no health insurance and 100 million have medical debt. And you can be middle class with medical debt in the same way you can be middle class with college debt.
People back in 1970 paid an average of $915 per year adjusted for inflation when it came to healthcare costs. But these days, that total is now $1,400 more per year for the average person. On a per year basis, this might not seem like a lot, but I do think that all these costs really add up for the middle class. So the big question I had for this video was, how have wages wages been trending for the past 50, 60, or 70 years. Because if wages were able to rise at the same pace as the cost of living increases, then theoretically no one should be feeling squeezed. So look at this, between 1970 and 2020, the middle class share of aggregate income actually dropped by 20% in the United States. Meanwhile, the share of upper income for upper class households saw an increase of 21% in that same time period. And while GDP and productivity growth have actually increased over the past 50 years, hourly compensation has not grown at the same pace. Essentially, the middle class is not benefiting from these productivity and GDP growth changes. The minimum wage has also not increased since comically 2009 and still sits at $7.25 per hour, which is so low that let me just show you guys how low this is. If you were to make the minimum wage salary for 50 weeks, so you took 2 weeks off for vacation, you would make a whopping salary of $14,500. The poverty line is $14,580 if you have no dependents. So essentially, by working a minimum wage job for full time, you are actually being put into poverty. By the way, that's not even accounting for taxes. So if you had to pay taxes on that $14,500, you would be even more into poverty than you should have been. The failure to raise minimum wage has been one economic policy that I believe contributes the most to the situation that we're in. Now, earlier on in the video, I said that there were some people that actually doubted that the middle class squeeze was actually happening. In the paper by the Cleveland Federal Reserve, they conclude that the middle class is not worse off than before by citing two main reasons. The first is that real median income, which means income adjusted for inflation, has actually been going up over the past 50 years. And number two, that the prices in housing, healthcare, and education have actually gone up. So yes, they acknowledge that, but they are offset by price decreases in transportation, food, and recreation. So let's look at point number one. In terms of real median income, it actually has been increasing inflation adjusted over the past 50 years. That is a fact. But the Pew Research Center actually again notes that the rise in income from 1970 to 2020 was the steepest for upper income households. Their median income increased 69% during that time span, from $130,000 to $219,000 per year. The percentage share that the middle class gets from that increased growth has been quite negligible, while a lot of the gains went to the upper class households. So this could still be a reason why the middle class is feeling squeezed. In regards to point number two about the price decreases for transportation, food, as well as recreation, you can see evidence by this video that transportation and food costs are actually quite up. Recreational costs, I would argue, have actually gone way up since 2020. So SeatGeek actually just confirmed that the average price of concert tickets have doubled in the past 5 years. And I think the prices of movies, sports games, as well as going to a convention have gone up massively as well as of recent. So what should we do about all this? Now, I think until policy changes actually take effect and reverse what we've been seeing, I think one step that you can take is to just make sure that you're spending within reason and you are actually being able to afford what you can afford. I personally have a ton of videos on affordability, on houses, on cars, on everything in my channel, so I'm gonna link those down below for you guys. Another thing that I think you can do is to bounce around in your job or your career if you are willing to do it. So according to the Wall Street Journal, those that switch jobs are earning a lot more than those that stay. And oftentimes these job switches can actually lead to an increase in your compensation of 10, 20, or 30% more per year. I actually made a video on this exact topic as well on my channel, and it goes into the reasons why that's actually happening, and I think that it is definitely true. Every time my friends change their jobs every couple of years, I notice that they get an increase in their pay as well as their role maybe changes a little bit, and their title usually increases as well. Doing so also gives you the opportunity to renegotiate your pay every time you do this. Now, you don't have to do this to increase your income, and if you're happy at your job, you might just want to stay at your job, but it is an option out there. If you are able to lower your spending or even increase your income, then I think one of the things that you should also be doing is contributing more of that income or those savings into a Roth IRA or an individual retirement account. As of 2024, you can contribute $7,000 a year into your Roth IRA or your IRA, and a mere contribution of $250 a month in your Roth IRA compounded over 40 years at the average stock market return could get you an ending balance of over $904,000. If you up that contribution to $400 a month, your future value will be over $1.44 million. And if you're able to max out the IRA at $7,000 a year, you're looking at over $2 million in compounded returns, assuming you get the average stock market return. All right, so I don't think the middle class quality of life is what it once was. Owning property seems difficult. Having kids at the age of 30 sounds really expensive, and generally cost of living is just up overall.
Well, I mean, you just have record inequality in this country. The 3 wealthiest American families own more wealth than the bottom half of the American people combined. That to me is an indicator of like a society that's out of whack. There's all these different pressures on middle-class people, and we can't forget those.
Let me know what you guys thought of this video in the comments, and also check out my next video right here. I'm gonna leave it up. It's how to increase your pay by switching jobs, and I think you'll find it really interesting. I'll see you guys in the next video.